Hi everybody, this is Leo Volont. I've been writing a lot of spiritual stuff lately, and let's do something political for a change. Here I wrote this morning. The necessity for one world socialist government. Two factors are propelling the world into catastrophic crisis. The first is global climate change, and the second is the vast inequality of wealth, or I should say an extreme concentration of wealth in the private hands, leaving not enough wealth left over to pay for essential public infrastructures required for the maintenance of a major global civilization. Starved of resources, an economic and social collapse would be inevitable, and billions would die as the world plunges into a new dark age. Our only salvation would have to be through fundamental and systematic change. No single nation or even a limited alliance of nations could go it alone, not as long as any major power can still exercise a prerogative to irresponsibly pillage enough global resources to topple the rest of the world into a concatenated collapse. Global capitalism as it is now consists of billions of intertwined connections and interdependencies, where the proverbial chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Our challenge would be to disentangle that whole mess and restructure the world economy on a new foundation without first knocking over the old. It is not likely that we will succeed. But, damned if we do and damned if we don't. But we need to at least give it a try. The task of unifying jurisdictions would be daunting. Of course, the superpowers would stand in the way. Look at what they did to Muammar Gaddafi, who is neither a communist or a radical Islamist. But he did put himself at the forefront of a pan-African unification movement. The combined Western assault on African political self-determinism was as extreme as anything from the 19th century. Sheer imperialism backed by military force. So any unifying coalition of world states would have to quickly pool military resources as well as establish their own banking resources, establish secure trade routes, and lay down plans to assure food security. But maybe they could avoid the worst if only they make a contribution to the Clinton Foundation, which was probably Colonel Gaddafi's most significant oversight. He did not pay off the wicked witch of the West. Of course, the world states could never be democratic because every small country would be assured of never being represented by a popular democratic vote, which would hand solid dominance only to the most populated jurisdictions. Small countries would always lose in democracy. As we now see in democracies the world over, it is the ethnic or religious majorities that take the entire pie. 49% of the people, the losers in democracy, are effectively disenfranchised. So no, government would have to be by open, competitive civil service appointments, and all economic and fiscal policies would have to be governed according to some constitutional algorithm, which would guarantee each world citizen a specified piece of the pie. Fortunately, the world has very affordable supercomputing information systems, which advances in artificial intelligence will only make better. And so computerized economic planning would encompass the whole world with enough fine-grained resolution to specify the resource disposition down to each individual. Now, if the smaller nations are protected from the democratic dominance of larger nations, then the smaller nations would be less fearful about bringing larger nations into the fold. The viability of the world states would depend upon their attaining a certain critical mass of mineral, food, and manufacturing resources. In the same way as the advanced nations now use their effective monopoly in capital and weapons systems to compel the developing nations to acquiesce to their hegemony, well, a unified front of world states with enough stuff could turn that same dynamic around on a declining Western Europe and Canada. Well, I suspect the United States, with its doomsday military megalith, designed on purpose to oppose the rest of the world, well, the U.S. will be the last holdout. But one wonders whether any of the other major powers would find it to their advantage to join the world states. Certainly any of the major powers that now feel politically and militarily isolated could benefit not just attaining an incremental increase in their pool of military weaponry, but more importantly by having access to military bases all around the world, as well as whatever maritime rights that go along with them. And yes, we need to discuss world military organization. The military would have to be a world organization and not just regiments from the various states, which is how the United Nations presently runs their collective security. There is no cohesiveness in a mixed force. So yes, somewhere the world states would have to set up a world city, not in the territory of any one particular of the world states, but a separate and independent nucleus city where both military and political officials and officers could be schooled from childhood in the universal language. They'll have to make a universal language, and to be so totally indoctrinated in the ideologies of world jurisdiction that they would come out fully identifying themselves as world citizens. Seeing their home regions is simply quaint hometowns, but all their allegiance would be to the unified world. Hey, people never used to think of themselves as like of the United States. They used to think of themselves as being from the States. Someday we will have world citizens. Would China or Russia put aside their parochial national prides and agree to the acceptance of a unified world? Well, why not? If China believes in the strength of its culture and civilization, then it could almost bet that with an impartial education for all world citizens in the world arts, history, and culture, that world civilization would come along slowly towards leaning their way. That world civilization in the centuries to come would take on the color of the Confucian traditions and values. Why not? They're a successful civilization. But if they wanted to impose their own language, that should be a deal breaker. A scientifically designed universal language could be learned in 6 months. But given 6 months with Mandarin, you've barely gotten started. Oh, Russia could also stand to be a winner if more people were exposed to their passionate cultural achievements. Of course, I worry about both India and Pakistan, two major world powers, but because of their enmity and proximity to one another, well, they zero each other out. They are the same people, except for an artificial difference in religions. Certainly, the secular elements in India and Pakistan could create, arguably, the center of gravity for any world civilization. But before they can do that, they both need to get out of the 14th century. Iran also, the old Persian Empire, perhaps the most moral the world has ever known, before or since. Well, they would need to shake off that Arab conquest that they still suffer under. And they should remember their own greatness as well as their own religion. I think Zoroastrianism is great. Europe has experimented with broader jurisdictions lately, but is not entirely happy with how it's been going. And the Germans are still behaving like they believe they are the master race. England's Brexit embarrassment shows that they are delusional, supposing their declining little island is still a dominant world power. So there's limits. What about Latin America? Well, they have a strong left wing, but they also have a scary and very deadly right wing. We can only pray that justice will prevail there. Now, if the universal world language could be made to project a strong Latin flavor, and who could object to that? Then I think that Latin America could be a power center for the world state as it strives for, hopefully, a peaceful world conquest. But yes, while it may seem hopeless, the nations of the world really need to unite into one unified world socialist government. It should start with a series of dinner parties given by the various UN ambassadors. Nothing serious in the history of the world has ever begun without at first talking over drinks. Anyway, let me close this thing out before it gets too long.